There are U.S. federal and state laws that require automakers to provide the same online education resources to independent technicians that they already provide to their franchise dealer technicians, but the requirements are very limited. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, requires automakers to provide their online dealer resources to independents for emission system service only. The 2013 Massachusetts Right to Repair law requires automakers to provide their online dealer resources to independents for everything bumper to bumper. But that law currently applies only to automakers selling passenger vehicles in the state of Massachusetts, and for the benefit only to independent technicians in that state. The 2014 Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, is a voluntary contract between the independent aftermarket and most automakers in the United States. It was modeled after the Massachusetts law and extends the automaker's commitment across all 50 states. A small NASTF poll of independent shop owners and technicians suggests they need and want the automaker education just as they need and want the automaker's online service information. Yet, in another small NASTF poll, statistics from the automaker's technical websites show very little access by independent technicians. OEMs report the distribution of online training videos or books has been very disappointing since 2006. What's happening here? There's a disconnect between the need of the technician and the requirements on the OEM. Are automakers in compliance with regulations or their voluntary commitments? Are those videos prepared for the dealer tech even relevant to the independent technician? Are technicians even aware of automaker resources, or are they unable to use the resources already available? These questions and more are the basis of a panel discussion today featuring an automaker, a shop owner, and an educator. As with all NASTF sessions, aftermarket access of OEM education resources is to be a constructive discussion in search of opportunities for a solution. At NASTF, it's not us versus them. It's all of us, the independent technician, the automakers, and everyone in between working together for a satisfied customer, no matter how old their vehicle or where they choose to have it serviced. Welcome to the featured session of the NASTF Fall 2014 General Meeting, Aftermarket Access to OEM Education Resources.
Thank you. While the movie was playing there, the panelists have made their way to the stage, and I'd like to introduce them right now. In the middle, Jill Saunders is the tech stream engineer for Toyota Motor Sales. Jill, welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
On this end is Bill Moss. He's the owner of Euro Service Automotive in Warrenton, Virginia. And on the far end down there is Rob Morell, the training manager for WorldPack. So I'm going to sit down here with the panel and play as their moderator. And the audience is invited to ask questions at the appropriate time too. This is intended to be interactive. We have microphones on the side. Please be aware that this is being webcast, so if you're not at a microphone, the web viewers will not be able to hear you. So please make your way to a microphone if you have a question to ask. Now with my new hat on, let me just point out as we go here, the line of questioning that the panel has agreed to pursue here to try to add some organization to what we think is a very complex issue at many levels. It's also, we know that it's on the minds of both automakers and the technicians themselves. And we talked about this in the board meeting this morning, that this topic is very much like what occurred in the very beginning of NASTF, where the technicians had certain expectations and thought they were trying to access the service information from automakers one way, and on the other side of the river, the automakers were attempting to build bridges for their service information, and the two really had never talked about the issues, and they had successfully built two half bridges that didn't meet in the middle. We have a similar situation here, I think, with education, which is why we brought it to this panel today. Our line of questioning, we're going to first talk about the responsibilities and self-interests of both parties, the problems and barriers that exist maybe to the success of a good connection between the expectations of the technician and the abilities and capabilities and interests of the automakers. And then finally, if we can find any common ground, perhaps we can identify some ways of improving access and the use of the resources that the OEMs are spending money to create already. Looking for some solutions perhaps, and maybe even some next steps. So, just leave that slide up there. Didn't memorize that part very well. So anyway, I got a pretty honorable panel, I think, on this topic. I'm very, very fortunate to have these three industry experts up here with me to bring some discussion to this topic. So the first thing I want to do is let's look at the responsibilities and self-interest, and I'm going to ask first Bill Moss, what are the education challenges for working technicians today? Bill, if you can kind of describe that and address your answers to the audience and to the camera up there, I think it'll kind of look better on TV than all of us looking at each other.
Oh boy, TV. I think that the primary obligation that the technician has to the customer, and that's what we all serve, is the customer, the car owner. I learned from Mark Saxenberg 10 or 12 years ago. It's to be service ready. It's to be prepared via tooling and education to serve the car that comes in your bay. And whether that means you limit your choices of cars that come in your bay, or whether you limit the degree or the depth in which you service a car, that's your obligation, to be service ready, to be capable of addressing the customer's car to a satisfactory completion that serves both you and the customer, and ultimately the automaker if the customer is happy with what you do. The tech's responsibility is to grow their career. We all have taken it upon ourselves to learn what we need to learn to further ourselves personally and professionally. So it's not part of NASTF's mission for the tech to do that, but it is part of NASTF's mission to make the resources available in terms of OE resources, OEM resources available to the technician so that they can grow professionally.
Right, yeah, Bill, let me follow up on that. Can you speak about the tech's own responsibilities as being an adult learner? I think we all know in this industry that you can't just have mechanical ability when you're 25 or 20 and get into this industry and last forever.
The tech's responsibility starts very early on. We can't count on OE websites or OE training to provide engine management theory to a technician. They would have theoretically gain that either by on-the-job training or an educational process, they would come to the job with some theoretical knowledge of how a car works, DC voltage, electronics, engine management, drivetrain, suspension. A lot of those are very basic, very generic skill sets that we've developed either through OJT or training. But those are not the responsibility of the OE, and in my opinion, the OE's responsibility is much more vehicle specific, much more system specific to their product. But the obligation it's very widespread. None of us stop learning because cars don't stop evolving. You have to keep, to stay current, you have to keep educating. Wherever that education comes from, whether it's OE or OE training a trainer or on-the-job training, peer training, a lot of means.
Right. Well, let's jump across the river then. And Jill, if you would kind of address all the regulations and all the voluntary agreements that have been written so far, indicate that automakers shall make all their online dealer education available to independents. Can you describe for us what the typical dealer content looks like for Toyota?
So at Toyota, when we train our technicians, we have a roadmap that we've laid out for technicians based on certification so that they can continue to grow their education. And part of that certification is based on experience and ASE testing. So we have a roadmap that kind of outlines where the technician is and how they want to grow themselves. We've provided that for them. And all of the content that we provide to our dealer technicians is available on our tech info site, so that anybody that would like to subscribe to the site has access to all of that content.
Yeah, this is consistent, I think, with what I've seen, and perhaps all of you have seen that have been on to some of the automaker websites, or perhaps even worked in automobile franchise dealerships. It all begins with like Jill said, this roadmap where you've got a basic education, and then you go to this, and then you go step to this. So you don't take this training until you've had this training, and it's all laid out for the technicians. Whereas on the technician side, it's usually more on demand when they are thinking about getting their education on a particular system that they may be working on or soon to be working on in their shop. And I think maybe you confirm for me, but that is the first disconnect I think we see, that the way you have designed your education systems for the dealerships is not the way the technician in the independent aftermarket is typically going to try to use that. Now, Bill, maybe you can add to that, but I don't know if on the independent side there's that roadmap that exists.
Often the independent side is consumed in problem solving. You can be relatively service ready or think that you're service ready, but you get the car in that either is an out-of-the-box challenge, or you're working at the edge of your service readiness. And then you start searching for problem-solving data, not necessarily an educational path, not necessarily training, but solution-based training, which is a different animal. And that is more apt to come, I think, from peers It's in my world, it almost exclusively comes from peers or trial and error. It's not in a course. It's not in a program. It's applying your skill basis, your theories and knowledge that you've accumulated to problem resolution. And looking for that on a website, you'll look a long time and never find it.
Right. So in a separate discussion this morning, Charlie Gorman related, and you really have to have been there. You know, there's a lot of regulations and agreements that have been signed over the years on the issue of service information availability to the independents. But what comes out in a legal document, if you don't know the perspective on that, and I think what Charlie Gorman related to me this morning was that the real intent of the word education or training that was in the EPA document from the early Clean Air Act implementation. The intent was that the automaker's education would not necessarily play directly to the technician, but rather to the third-party trainer that is independent in the aftermarket, and really most of the training to independent technicians is from those independent trainers. So for this, Rob Morrell down on the other end down there, Rob, you've probably got some thoughts on that subject, and add to this conversation here about the responsibilities of the automaker and the responsibilities of the technician, and how you might play in the middle there in helping to resolve this issue.
Training the aftermarket is quite different than training the aftermarket is quite different than training within the dealership group. The aftermarket, the backgrounds are much more varied. They're not in a structured program per se, so you have to appeal to a much wider knowledge base or lack of knowledge on that part. But I do think that the OEMs offer great value in their training material, but it's digested a little bit differently for the aftermarket. I would agree with that.
Is there, should we be talking here about a roadmap for independent technicians? I mean, if they're getting the training, maybe they go to a community college and get a good, 2-year orientation to the technical side of our industry. They go out and they work in the industry for a couple of years, and they go to a couple of seminars on a couple of things that they're working on, maybe manufacturer seminars, or it could be a WorldPack seminar. Or do we need something more structured? Is it time to do that for the industry?
It's a little bit of herding cats there. You have some general repair shops. You have some specialist shops that work on either Asian or European or American cars, or domestic cars, I should say. And then you have some that are very specialized in just Toyota or just BMW or something of that sort. And they all require a little bit different take and background on everything. If you start using some of the Toyota material where they're talking about chassis numbers and that sort of thing, and immediately start teaching that to general repair shops, they don't understand any of that terminology, and the acronyms are different from BMW to Mercedes to Porsche. So the learning curve's pretty steep on with such a wide background, especially for the general repair shops. I think there could be something more structured, but again, it's not going to be easy because it's such a wide audience.
Rob, could you move the mic closer to you?
Yeah. Better? All right.
Now you're just having fun.
I think it's going to be a different kind of show if I go into I don't know.
I think one of the things too is that NASTF particularly, the focus of our conversations here at NASTF always involve the technician and the automaker. So I'm not trying to infer that we have any kind of jurisdiction, shall I say, over third-party trainers or the aftermarket training systems or aftermarket tools or anything like that, because what we're interested in here is mainly the automaker's resources are sitting there, and how can the technician consume them? If he can't, he has two choices here, really. He can get them directly from the automaker, but we've seen that it's not all that easy or complete or in the wrong order or whatever the problem is, or he can get it through a third-party trainer. For your trainers, if it wasn't for the could your trainers develop courses without OEM resources at all?
Yes.
How important are the OEM resources to third-party training?
Very important as far as the quality goes and the consistency in the customer's experience with that vehicle, whether it be like I said, a Toyota or a BMW. They're going to own that car for quite a long time, and they're going to base their opinion on that brand, on their experience, whether they take it to a dealer or an independent repair shop. And I think that the manufacturer's materials greatly help the aftermarket trainers. And it also offers, like I said, consistent quality, consistent routines, operations, procedures, and without any misinterpretation of that data. And I think it can work. I think we've proven it, that there's money in it. There's added monetary value to that training material, taking it into the aftermarket. There's obviously added training value, taking it into the aftermarket. And there's, I mean, we only work right now fluidly with a couple of manufacturers with the factory training material, and we've spent millions on that material, just with a few of them. So if there's definitely money there for the manufacturers. And I think there's also some work that can be done to the websites to make the information a little more digestible for the technicians and the shop owners. But I think the aftermarket's generally better at diagnostics, like Bill was saying earlier, because they have to be. And the OEMs are better at operations and procedures. And being able to consistently integrate those operations and procedures into the aftermarket is also going to support the brands as well. Like I said, monetarily and with a quality image of that brand. So it can work for everyone.
Jill, you want to? I saw you taking some notes. You want to make a comment to that, or you want me to go on to the next question?
You can go on to the next
Okay.
question. I was making comments for a question later.
Okay, all right, that's good too. Yeah, I was just going to say the introduction movie referred to the fact that the techs in our little mini survey we did aren't using many of the resources that are already available out there. The OEMs, some of the OEMs have reported to us that they're not selling many books and subscriptions, and they're not seeing many views on the videos that are there. What do you have any experience with that, or can you relate what's happening in fact at Toyota?
Yeah, so I ran some numbers before I came to this meeting to see how many people were, opening up the manuals that we have available. And actually, I was quite surprised. On average, I did about the last year and a half, we have about 3,000 views a month on our different course books that are available on our site. And we probably have an average of 3,000 to 4,000 subscribers a month as well. So I can't really determine, if it's an aftermarket technician or just a do-it-yourself person that's trying to learn something. But from what I can tell, the information that we have available is at least being looked at and read.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing maybe, and we did hear from some technicians that had been on to various sites, and Toyota was one of very few really out of the whole group that got very high marks on the content there, the ability to find it. So this could be, we do know that the websites, the navigation on the various OEM websites is very varied. What's on one website is how one's organized is quite different from how another is organized. NASTF's not in a position to be able to tell OEMs how they should organize their websites, but I think if there is an opportunity for us to show how one website organized one way is getting a lot of use or significant, I don't know if that's a lot or not, but it's getting a significant amount of use, it seems, then if another site is not, then what can we do? If the resources, I think the point there is if the OEM has already spent the money on the resources and it's there, then the best we can do is at least let the automaker know that there's a difference. Maybe they're missing out on some connections from either the technician directly or, like Rob said, the use by the independent trainer. So, you want to follow up on that Bill? Or?
My experience in our shop, in our world, has been that the training and the manuals that are available on the website are much more geared towards being a component of service ready. When we know that we've got a car coming in that we've never had in the shop before, we might visit the website or an alternate means of data collection just to fill our head with background data, theories of operation, strategies, so that when the car comes in, we at least aren't trying to figure that out on the spot. In some cases, the websites are very good for that. Best practices for OE website design would be like best practices for OE car design. They've got their plan. They're going to execute their plan. We are participants in the plan. We're not going to direct the plan. So I don't think. I'm probably speaking out of turn, but the websites it's dangerous to try to think that the websites are going to be problem-solving solutions. In my opinion, the OE websites are going to be an element, a significant portion of your training, but they're not going to be, when that car comes in the bay and you can't sort out, the website is unlikely to be going to hold the answer. You're not going to look for, how do I diagnose this particular issue? How do I resolve this particular issue? How do I take apart this particular structure? That's generally not going to be on the OE website. So I think part of it is educating the technician. What's the full range of resources? What other resources? And I think any technician in the room can say YouTube has gotten them out of something at one point or another. YouTube that's like Wikipedia. It's a voluntary database, and might be right, might not, but it's another tool. It's another tool in your box that supplements your knowledge. Sometimes it reinforces your knowledge, sometimes it negates your knowledge, but it's a tool. There's a no answer to your question.
Did you run for office yesterday? Yeah, I think I mentioned a minute ago that there was a survey of some technicians. In fact, the Car Care Professional Network. The Auto Care Association has a group within their association called the Car Care Professional Network. And a couple of months ago, Sue Kalish, who runs that group for Auto Care Association, offered to me the opportunity for their 10 members of their control board, who are all shop owners, offered me their expertise in reviewing some of the automaker websites, just to get some insight of how they may use it. Because admittedly, we found out that most of them, they were familiar with one or two of the websites. Maybe Ford, GM, and Toyota, I think, were the most popular. But we asked them to go on and check some other websites to see if they could find education on a particular topic, a real in-service topic. What I asked them to do was to look at a common service situation and how they might try to educate an employee on that topic. We got all 10 reviews back, and in Sue's summary to me of the replies and some of the answers, I want to run down this fairly long list here and ask the panel to comment on some of the findings and what they may mean for us going forward. One of the comments, or the summary comments, was after purchasing the subscription, they had to spend time on the phone with IT technology support, trying to get access to TSBs and other PDFs on repair information, but got no help. Now, we know that this didn't happen on all of them, but it happened on enough of them to suggest here that either the technician had the wrong expectation, or the automaker didn't have the kind of support in place to handle this kind of thing. Jill, can you give us some idea of how that transaction takes place?
So I can't really speak to other manufacturers' websites because I'm not quite as familiar with them. But I know that if I had a customer, an aftermarket technician, that was having problems finding the information that they were looking for, and it wasn't communicated back to us, it's kind of hard to solve a problem that I don't know is a problem, I guess you could say. Maybe one solution would be that I need to work better, like, with my IT group, so we have a better communication about what the expectation is of the technician or the layout of our site, so we can try to find a way to resolve that, to make everyone more happy. Not everyone's never going to be 100% happy, but
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rob? I know you spend a lot of time on OEM websites, and I think what we'd like to do here is also bring in the perspective of the third-party trainer, who also has to go and use those websites. And like Charlie said, if the EPA's intent was for people like you to be using those websites and accessing that information, what is your experience with that?
We've worked with a lot of the manufacturers over the years now, and there's one thing that's fairly clear. The sites that get used more often and more successfully generally have more support. And for some of the smaller manufacturers, they don't really have anybody specifically assigned to that, much less a team or anything that they can refer to improve things or to add accessibility to the website. So not many people use the website, and there's not much revenue coming in from it. So kind of a perpetual problem. The ones that did invest a little bit into it and worked on restructuring it a little bit for the aftermarket, they get more traffic. And we, in every class, we do try to train people so that they understand that the websites are there and how to use them. But again, it kind of goes back to the manufacturer. Same thing with the J2534 tools and that sort of thing. If there's not really anybody there at the manufacturer to support you, to hook that up and to utilize it, then it does get pretty difficult, and they tend not to get much traffic either. You get one negative experience and they don't come back. So.
I think there's roughly 20 or 22 production popular light vehicle manufacturers in the United States, and with a few of them having reasonable support and getting the compliments that I know that some get, I also hear from many manufacturers that, here in the service support group for dealers and everybody, it's like a one-man band. I don't have the resources. Some of these OEMs are telling me they don't have the resources to make changes or go out and, you can imagine a big company, it's a major thing to redesign a website. So when we point out something to them, if it's not just a simple letter change, words are much harder to change. So how aware are we of that situation, that different automakers are going to have different levels, capabilities, different abilities to support the users?
Well, a lot of that is in their own administration, but I think there is a lot of value to putting together a best practices document and what's available on the free side of the site, so people realize what they're going to get out of it if they pay for it, and then again what is on the paid for side of the site. There are some sites, like you said, that have put a lot of work into it, and they're a little more successful now, and they're getting a lot of traffic. And I think, like we were talking about earlier, if we can put together a best practices guideline for everyone, it would probably help a little bit of a cheat sheet.
Now, let me move down the list here. Bill, I'll ask you this. One of the common comments we got was that the websites generally only work with Internet Explorer browsers, no Mac access, problems using even Windows 7. Do you have any experience with that, and how much of a problem is that?
My scope is somewhat limited because of the cars that we choose to work on. And if it's a core brand to you, if it's a brand that you're going to need to access data on continuously, then it merits the software adjustment. I was thinking in a comment that you made earlier, if I have a one-off vehicle, that I have a one-off problem, and I pay $30 to access that website that day, and I spend an hour trying to access that website or trying to find the data I want, and I can't find it, if it's not a core critical issue to me, it's a punt and move on to the next project. And as Joe mentioned, I may never approach that manufacturer and say, I had a hard time accessing data on your website. I had a hard time producing a document. I couldn't. My internet provider, my internet access tool wasn't compatible. If it's a core issue, then I guess that's really where best practices should come in. And on the front side, on the non-subscription side, we were talking about that this morning, something on the non-subscription side that said what's behind the door. After you pay your money, what do you get? What's going to be, if we could categorize what is patently available, so that I know that I'm going to find torque specs. I'm going to find labor times. I'm going to find X, Y, and Z. If I knew that on the front side, then I wouldn't be inclined to spend $30 and be frustrated because what I hoped was there isn't. And I know I digressed a little bit from your question. I haven't, to your question, between Internet Explorer and Apple products, I don't have much personal experience with that being difficult. I have, for example, in using the Mercedes site, sometimes, and I can't remember specifics, but I've run into roadblocks that required me to really go to what's required to use our website page and analyze, have I turned off this, have I turned on that, have I gone through the steps that they mandate to get my answer. But that's a core product for me. I will take the time to do that. If it's a non-core issue, I may not. And I may just walk away and say, I lost my $30, I don't have an answer, and I'm never servicing this car again. But then there's no betterment to the industry when I do that, as opposed to calling up the manufacturer and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this. Help me out.
Yeah, one of the things that I think NASTF has done right from the very beginning was, if you look at the NASTF matrix, the service information matrix, there was an education matrix, a tool and equipment matrix, and a vehicle security matrix, and all of these matrices essentially were an inventory of what the automaker provided, and check it off. Presumably, 10 years ago, that was of value to technicians. They could come to the NASTF matrix and see, oh, this maker offers this, this, and this. Great, I'll go use their site. I think what we're finding, though, is the assumption now is that everything is available, so I'm just going to go to their site. But what's happening is, because the different designs of the websites, I know on this education project, there was a minority of the websites where if you were looking for education resources, you could find the word education or training within one click of the homepage. And I think this goes to what you were saying too, where if you had an opportunity to know before you bought a subscription, even, that something was either there or not, is there any hope? Or should you be looking somewhere else?
Well, exactly, and as noble as it might be for that for NASTF to try to do that in a matrix, you can't keep up with it. NASTF you would have to employ somebody to update the matrix page. In my opinion, yeah, I think it would be a great thing. And going back to best practices, that's a pretty simple best practice. It doesn't require any restructuring. It just requires a table of contents page on the sign up or on the registration page that this is what's going to be found inside. The only thing that would be the primary part of that would be best practices is trying to homogenize terminology so that one manufacturer doesn't call it something that another manufacturer does, and you think you're looking for the same thing, but you're not.
Right. We have an audience question. You want to come to the microphone there, and if you'll identify yourself. Thank you.
Are these on? Okay, sure. So this morning I went to a class because I am very involved with APRA, which is the Automotive Parts Remanufacturers Association. And I'm also involved with ATRA, which is the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association. Our company is Certified Transmission. We're from Omaha, Nebraska. We have approaching 500 employees. We do 40,000 transmissions a year. And I want to ask anybody in here, in any of your shops, have you seen any Sprinter vehicles yet? No. But, oh, there's one over there. So the Sprinter is made by Mercedes, and was, for a while, you could, if you were a Dodge dealer, you could buy a Sprinter franchise. And for a while, if you were a Freightliner dealer, you could buy a Sprinter franchise. we are beginning to sell tons of transmissions for sprinters. Many of the new transmissions have computers inside of the transmission. So let's say that I rebuild this transmission and I want to put it on my dyno. I have a computer that runs the dyno. I have another computer that records the data from the dyno. But I have to have an interface that speaks the same language of all three so that we can record the data so we can test the transmission. The newest thing that Mercedes has done is they have a key. And if the key does not talk to the transmission computer will not tell the vehicle computer to tell the engine computer, you can start the engine. So without the Mercedes key in my factory that's to that specific vehicle ID number, I can't even test the transmission, let alone ship one of the 40,000 a year that we do. So the issue that I'm having with both of my two trade associations and why I came to a seminar over here this morning, and then he recommended I come over here, was I want to find out what every other association is doing because Mercedes is not going to share that information with us. And so far, I can't find any place where General Motors is going to share the information with us. So I believe as trade associations, we need to, you know, I know there's some folks here from Chrysler, I believe, and Chrysler has been very helpful to us. Nissan, for example, was not helpful to us whatsoever. In our main factory, we literally kept a Nissan Titan truck on the guy who changed the oil for our fleet of vehicles on his lift. So we would have to take a transmission apart, take the valve body out, which has got the computer attached to it, send it to the valve body department, and then it's separated. We have one group that, you know, pretty easy. They rebore the pistons, they put oversized pistons in. So that part, the mechanical part, we can do pretty easily, and you guys could really do if you had to do one of those. But then the next part is the solenoids. Every single one of them has a barcode on it, and that barcode is scanned, and it's scanned against that VIN, which is scanned against that key, which there's no way to get any of the information to do this. So we would literally have to put the computer and the valve body into that truck that we kept on a hoist and go on a 30-minute drive for adaptive relearn to, excuse me, to clear any failure codes.
All right, I don't mean to cut you off here,
No,
but
that's
this is
okay.
an education
I
question.
know
So,
that.
and I think your question has several elements in it, but
It does.
I want to let the panel
Perfect.
answer kind of the education component of this, if you will. Thank you very much
That's
for
good.
bringing your
That's
question.
exactly what I was
Sure.
trying to get.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. What he was referring a little bit to the Mercedes program theft-related parts, which is not really an education issue, but for servicing any transmission or any major component in a vehicle. What about getting access to the training on a specific vehicle or vehicle system? How accessible is that, and how realistic is it for a shop like that to say, I'm going to sit my 500 employees down at their computer, and they have to go through this series of Mercedes videos to learn that system on how to educate themselves on servicing that system. This is not the access to the security codes you're looking for, but on an education issue. How realistic is that?
Well, we actually do classes on the Mercedes transmissions. I don't know how far we want to get into the security end of it, which is very difficult on that. But getting the parts for those transmissions can also be equally difficult. And how are you going to rebuild it if you can't get valve body parts for it? But There is some information on the Mercedes website about, pretty good information about the transmissions. But you really do have to have a live hands-on course to be able to work on those. They are different than the ZF transmissions or the Asian or any of those. They're their own unique transmission, and so when you work on a variety of brands, when you're again goes back to when you're working general repair, then it becomes very difficult cost-wise to get all the special tools, to get the training, and then to get access, like he's saying. That's a complicated question. There's not a simple answer, unfortunately.
Let me just invite the gentleman and also any of the other web viewers or people in the audience who are not subscribers to the NASTF newsletter. Please go online and do so. Membership in NASTF is free. It's open to the industry. And I mention that because frequently in the NASTF newsletter, we cover issues like this, and particularly about the Mercedes theft-related parts program, and willing to answer your particular emails with those questions as well. Our Vehicle Security Committee and our Service Information Committee are constantly dealing with those. We have to move on here. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so thank you very much for your comments.
I will say one thing, though. The training, the access to the information, the SDRM information, all of that has become an integral part of the training now. It has to. So you can't complete the repair without having those abilities.
Yeah, before we start to wrap this up, I do want to talk about the opportunity for some resolution out of all this, maybe what the next step. Now, Rob mentioned that a guidelines document would be a good start. The NASTF Education Committee has been talking about, of which Rob is a co-chair, has been talking about producing some kind of guidelines or best practice documents so that if an OEM, I think presumably, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rob, but presumably if an OEM was going to make some changes to their website or was going to redesign their training resources on their website, at least they would have some insight from the group on how that might be more useful to the industry, and also what some of the other manufacturers have discovered as being more useful to them. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, I would agree.
So we're in the middle of that project, but and anyone that wants to join that education committee and participate in that discussion, we certainly would welcome anyone. Jill, not all automakers are big enough to do what Toyota's done to educate the independent technicians, but it appears that Toyota USA has a corporate philosophy of the value of the aftermarket as being an asset to their brand. Can you talk about that and how that culture permeates through Toyota?
Yeah, so Rob was saying earlier how I was making notes on it, that it really is, if you think about it, like a brand. So Toyota is a brand, and customers that are driving our Toyota vehicles, whether they're the first owner or the second owner or the third owner, and they take their vehicle to our dealer or they take it to an aftermarket or independent shop. If those independent shops aren't able to fix our Toyota vehicles in a timely and efficient manner, that gives a bad taste to the customer. Not necessarily about the shop, but, oh, this car isn't really such a good car. And so it's important for Toyota to work with the aftermarket because they are servicing our customers and hopefully, feeling that giving the customer, oh, I like this car, and when I'm ready to buy a new one, I'm gonna go to a Toyota or a Lexus dealer and buy this new car because I can get it fixed.
Bill, this question is for you. It's not the responsibility of the automakers to educate independent technicians, but it, like Joe said, it could be in their self-interest. Are there, actually this was for Rob, not for Bill, sorry about that.
Go ahead, Bill.
What are, so Rob, what are the one or two things that I think WorldPac could use from the OEMs to make your education program a better success?
Well, I think for aftermarket trainers, licensing agreements would greatly help. We've got a few with a couple of manufacturers, but most manufacturers don't have anything like that in place. And for example, like with one manufacturer, they make, because their dealer techs have kind of a limited scope of what they're working on, and based on their previous education, one of their engine books was pretty limited. We worked with them to put chapters together from several different documents that they had, and kind of make our own for the aftermarket engine manual that covered about five or 6 years, and was substantially beefier than the factory manual. They actually renamed it and put WTI in the title of that, and we've so far bought about $500,000 of those and used them to train the aftermarket. And I think being able to license and repurpose those materials is a huge benefit for everybody, and it also makes sure that nobody's abusing the relationship as well. So I think there's a lot of that.
Good. This one is for you, Bill. In order for a shop to make a profit, you need a technician who can fix the car right the first time. So we need to make an investment in education up front so that they're not learning on the customer's car.
Yeah, this goes to whatever your best practices are for hiring technicians. In my shop and in a lot of shops that I talk to, training is an integral part of your employee contract. We specify a number of hours. I'll be glad to pay for that training as a shop owner, but I'll also pick the classes that I send you to. If I feel that you need X, Y, and Z, then I'll send you to that. If everybody's going to a training event, I may or may not include that. There's no point in training somebody in something that they're already skilled with. So not every class is for everybody, but we try to inform the techs what's available. We try to stay informed ourselves about what's available in terms of training resources, and then we foot the bill. But it's not optional; it's mandatory.
Okay. We've come to just about the end of our time here. Panelists have any final thought in a very brief period of time, or if not, I will try to wrap this up. I think that it continues to be an elusive topic, and the Education Committee for NASTF is going to continue to examine this and see if we can develop some role for NASTF. And certainly anybody in the audience here on live or on the web is invited to send your thoughts on this topic to NASTF so that we can have the benefit of your wisdom and your experience as well. Both OEMs and the technicians. We need to hear from both. Like we said in the beginning, it's not us versus them, it's all of us together. So I want to thank everybody. Thank my panelists. Please give them a round of applause. I thank them for participating.